Hi, it's Victor from Real Robots Rocks, and we're going to talk about batteries and how to get started with using lithium batteries in particular. I think everybody knows that lithium is pretty much here to stay, and it's the best choice if you were looking for a good balance in size, weight, and the amount of power that you can get from the batteries. But I'm going to talk about what, if you're building your first couple of robots or you're building your first robot, what batteries should you start with in terms of lithium, and that's what we're going to talk about. As everybody has knows, lithium batteries, you can get them in little cells like this, 18650. So these are quite popular. I mean, if you compare it to your AA battery and your 18650, this is quite a bit bigger, but this has about 10 watts of power, and this barely has 2 watts, so 2 to 3 watts. So there's quite a bit more power in this, right? But I don't recommend actually using these directly, and the main reason is that if you're first starting out, I think you're having a lot of other issues, right? And the last thing you want to worry about is things blowing up in your face, and these can blow up in your face if you don't use them properly. So one of the problems is that if you discharge too much current out of these things, or you don't understand sort of the general who made them or the limits of these batteries, they can actually generate a lot of heat and release a lot of chemicals out of the battery and basically cause a fire, just like our famous disasters that we've had from phones in the past. And so typically if you were to use something like this, you would need something to protect it, and that's what a BMS is. But since you're using a bare battery, there's no BMS inside here. So BMS is a battery management system. It's used to protect the battery from overcurrent, over voltage when you're charging. Basically protecting this battery from doing bad things to you or to your robot, or to anything around it, right? Because these basically explode if they get hot enough, and that's the real problem, right? So now, different batteries will have different type of characteristics. Even the same chemical composition has different characteristics, and basically you really need to understand who made it, and they have to provide you with information that is valid. For example, this particular battery is good for 2.5 amps, but it has ratings for how much it can discharge, how much you can charge at. There's also all sorts of things that are basically very, very vendor dependent. And so that's why I don't recommend this. In fact, I don't recommend the very common batteries like this, right? So you use these in drones, for example. I don't recommend it because, again, these don't have a BMS, right? So if you're not familiar with lithium batteries, again, bad things can happen, right? So without this, really doesn't have much protection. It's basically all battery, and it's got some things to measure each individual cells, but that's about it, right? So if there's any issues, you wouldn't know about it, right? So in other ones like this, they come in this form, right? You can get these from Alibaba. Again, there's no BMS inside. There's no battery management system, right? So if there's any problems here, you were to puncture it or anything like that, boom, bad things can happen. So what I generally recommend is actually starting out with something like this. Well, what's this, right? Well, this actually you can get at a very popular hardware store. And for very first robots, I actually use this as the battery. Because number one, this has a BMS, right? You can drop these just like any power tool, and you're less likely to have bad things like things blowing up happening, right? Because these things are rugged, right? They're designed to be dropped. And not only that, they have a BMS in here, so they protect from the temperature, from overcurrent. And what's also nice is that they come with a battery charger, right? So you don't have to go and find a very fancy battery charger. You get one of these, which comes with your power tool, and you can just, just charge it, right? No problem, right? No worrying about finicky connectors like this thing, right? Or no connectors like this thing, right? So, it's very convenient, right? So I'll actually show you one of my first robots here, right? So back here, very, very, it doesn't get much fancier than this, but, I basically took, part of the power tool and then I can just plug my battery in here and we're ready to go, right? And when I want to change batteries, I can just unleash it and put a new one in. Very convenient, very easy, and you don't have to deal with all of the safety issues associated with single cells, right? So the other, if you this is very easy to get at stores. You don't have to source it from unknown sources. They tend to have a warranty, and so these are pretty good. And now a second alternative is something like these guys, right? So these are from the Lithium. I'm not really advertising, but I actually use them in my other robots. And again, these also have a BMS in them, and it's all ready to go system. And they look very similar to these guys, right? So these guys are used in UPS systems. These are called the lead acid batteries that are in the gel form, right? And they're actually the same size, right? So again, these are very, very popular too, and you can get them in lots of places right now. These are actually used a lot in fishing and stuff like that. So these batteries are a lot easier to use with, right? And because they're more consumer friendly. If you were the short terminal, the battery has a BMS to protect, right? If you have an accident with your motor driver, right, there's a BMS that will protect it, right? And so that's why I think using stuff like this is far more easier when you're starting out, right? Obviously, when you get more advanced and you understand, inner workings of the BMS, and you start running into, fighting the dumb-proof electronics in here, then you can move on to something like this, right? But this is why I recommend these guys, right? And if you're worried about weight and stuff like that, so these guys, these are about 1,000 grams, right? These guys, you're probably talking about 700 grams. So you're getting a little bit of savings going from here to here, but it's not as much as, say, from going from these lead acid ones, which is almost 2.5 pounds to 1.2, right? So you get half, right? Even though these are about the same. I think there's a little bit more in this one. So that's what I recommend. So the other one more thing I want to talk about the batteries. One more thing, basically, is that they do come in different types. You can get them in different chemistries. Now, if you're dealing with outdoor robots, I actually recommend lithium iron phosphate. So this is a lithium iron phosphate. And why lithium iron phosphate? Well, lithium iron phosphate does have one disadvantage. Its main disadvantage is that it weighs more for the same wattage. So if you want a 100-watt battery, it's going to weigh 50%, 30% more, depending on who made it and how it's made. But what you gain is better reliability, and where it's more reliable is in lower temperatures. So it will operate in larger temperature ranges. It will also have less. If you were to puncture them, then they're less likely to have a catastrophic destruction, fire, basically. Right? So, the other types like these ones, they if you puncture them, it's going to be bad news. These ones, less so. Even if you have a BMS if you had a BMS version, so for example, I have one of these. These actually have a BMS inside, but these are lithium polymer. If you're to puncture, there's more likely to have bad damage than these, whatever that means. But basically, it's safer. And when you're doing this outdoors where the temperature is a little more variable than indoors, it's a sacrifice that right now I think it's a good sacrifice to make. But if you're indoors, I think indoors you can get away with lithium ion. Or lithium polymer, and I think it should be pretty safe. So that's all I really want to say about the batteries. If you're just getting started, you're building a little robot like the one behind here, I definitely recommend the battery, the type, and you basically don't have to worry so much about getting all the battery electronics, because it's pretty complicated if you really get into it. and then you can start focusing on the motors and, you know, getting your, you know, operating systems all working, and you can trust that the people who built the batteries, you know, they know what they're doing, and you don't have to worry too much about it. And then when you actually get your final form factor, or you're working on something that's closer to what you're going to present to a customer, or something that you're going to actually use long term, then you can worry about, you know, making this look nicer, or making it, you know, have lower weight, more power, right? So while you're first prototyping, this is your best bet. All right, so that's all I have to say. See you next time.